and my name is Baylan Megino with The Leader's Edge. Welcome to The Leader's Edge. I am absolutely honored today to have my guest, Jonathan Reynolds, the CEO and founder of Mindful Living. That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome, Jonathan.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so wonderfully happy that we have crossed paths because this is really the right time. I mean, mindfulness and mindful living has always been important, but especially now with the stresses and strains of what is happening for the last 2 years and also what's happening right now in the world. I think mindfulness is something that everyone can start to really practice. I would love to hear how did you start doing mindful practice?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I was really drawn to mindful practice because of my own personal suffering, my own personal challenges. I started practicing mindfulness proper in sort of the late 90s, and as a means to live a more skillful life, as a means to live in alignment with myself. And of course, that is aligned with nature, so a greater sense of self. And then over the years, that translated and codified and became what now mindful life, mindful work is, which is really an opportunity or an invitation to live in alignment with what's most important. So with meaning, with passion, with personal values, and extending those into systemic and company values. And again, just trying to make the world a better place and do what's right.
Hmm. Well, okay, we could take each one of those and go on for an hour for each one. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we have one person who wraps it all up beautifully, beautifully. So, really, as leaders, we've been spending, I think many of us have been spending the last 2 years looking for, well, how am I creating meaning in my life? And what is important to me? What are you finding that people are struggling with right now, or what are they presenting when they're coming to you?
Yeah, I think there's a crisis of meaning. I think that, when we look at this great exodus from people's jobs and things like that, I think a lot of people are recognizing that they weren't really connected to what they were doing. They were doing it for a job, they were doing it to make a living, and that's a fine starting point, and everybody needs to do what they need to do at various stages in their life. But I think at a certain point, we want more. When we really recognize that our time on this planet is limited, we want to contribute. We want to make the world a better place. And if we don't see the direct connection between our personal mission and our company's mission, there's a disconnect there. And it's really hard to sort of play that game forever. We can do it for various stages of our lives, but at a certain point, we say, what is this all about? What am I really doing to make people's lives better? And again, connecting our personal values to the values of an organization. And I think organizations typically, especially when they get to a certain size, have a hard time connecting individuals to the mission. And I think it's a real cultural challenge for organizations. Organizations, by definition, are organized, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're aligned with what people really need to feel satisfied. There's a wonderful story of when the pyramids were being built. It's sort of a metaphorical story that I think highlights this, which is you're cutting bricks into a certain shape to build the pyramids. And so you go and you ask the first guy, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm cutting this rock into these shapes and I'm doing it all day. And that's it. That's how he relates to what he's doing. You go to the next guy or woman and what are you doing? Oh, I'm gainfully employed and I'm doing this because it supports my family and puts food on our table. Great. Go to the third person. What are you doing? I'm building a temple to God. And so all are correct, all are right. And it's a matter of perspective. And yet, I think people want to build a temple to something greater than themselves. You can call that spirituality, you can call that human meaning, you can call that collective connection or consciousness, if you like. But without that, I think I was drawn to mindfulness practice early on because I felt there was something vacuous and superficial about just learning how to drive a car and balance my checkbook. If that's all I needed to learn to function in this society, it was going to be a very sad life. And I think that a lot of folks are coming to that realization now that the thing that they were chasing isn't satisfying. And so what do? You have to pivot, and it's really challenging for folks to pivot now, because if they have decades of sort of this one way of being, but I think that's what we're seeing. And so we're getting a lot of approaches around sort of the typical things that are sort of safe for companies and for individuals to ask for, stuff like team building. Well, what is really team building? Team building is a deeper connection. Really, every request is a deeper connection, whether it's a connection internally or it's a connection to productivity and to closing bigger deals. It's still a connection to value. And so I think that's what folks are really longing for.
Absolutely, I agree with you. You know, when we were doing, I created the Dream Maker Matrix, and when we're doing people are designing their matrix, they're really looking at what do they value, what makes them happy,
Mm,
and then how is that going to ripple out? So it starts inward and ripples outward. And what I'm finding, what I find is that there is that disconnect between what people understand as their connection to spirit and then everything else.
mm,
It's like, how do you bridge that gap that we've placed there between what I do on my whole on the holy day and what I do every day, right?
mm.
How do you help people bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. How do you touch into yourself and find your deepest truth? And then how do you translate that into the relational and the conventional workplace and marketplace, metaphorically? And so a lot of it is around priorities and values, what really matters to a person, and whatever they build. So when I'm doing individual work, and I don't do that much of that anymore, but once in a while I'll have an individual client around career development stuff. And it's important that a career is not a job. Jobs come and go, but a career for me is more like a through line. And that through line has to be built around our value base and our priorities, because otherwise it doesn't fit us.
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with somebody yesterday. They're looking for a job. And for me, that search is not an external search, it's an internal search. It's about finding what actually feels right and then marketing ourselves and networking ourselves around that value, because we want to bring that value to the world. That's really our gift to the world. So, how to touch into that? Um, in an interview, they have their questions that they want to know that you can do the standard stuff that the job requires. But really, what an employer wants to hear is that you're bringing something they don't know about. And if you don't present that, you're just like any other applicant. And so I think that's the way that everybody has to translate, is they have to really spend some quiet time. I think that is really effective in solitude or in mindfulness practice. Some people it's art, some people it's walks in nature. It can be anything, but a regular practice that informs what it is you feel to be your deepest truth, and then showing up and sharing that in a way that it can be received. So that's a delicate process as well, because once we find our deepest truth, we want to shout it from the mountaintop, but that's not always the most effective. We also can't whisper it. I sometimes liken it to water. If you want to give somebody water to drink, you don't spray them in the face with a fire hose, but you also don't give them a thimble of water. You give them a pitcher and a glass and you let them dispense. And so the challenge is to find our truth and then deliver it in a way that it's actually useful to the other, whether that other is a person, a society, a company, a world. How do we translate it?
The communication piece is so important because it really is the bedrock of that is really who am I, and how do I express myself in a way that feels incredibly authentic and is able to communicate uh, what is the most important part of me that needs to be shared in that moment. You don't share all of you all at once, right? It's not that fire hose. It's not
Mm-hmm.
fire hose, but it's also understanding, being empathetic enough to understand how you can share in a way that they can receive it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how
It's
does
it's it's
empathy fit
it,
in here?
I'm sorry, what?
How does empathy fit in here?
Well, it's huge. I mean, it's about psychological safety and sensitivity. It's about DEI sensitivity, that there's always a DEI bridge, whether it's racial or cultural or people from the same race and the same culture, but different backgrounds, socioeconomic. So really knowing that we don't know the experience of the other is essential, and being willing to be humble and to listen to the other's experience so we can meet it and be useful to it. And I think that's where mindfulness comes in. We don't shrink away from our value, but we also don't force our value. We stand in the center of our value in a powerful way, but in a way that also acknowledges the power of the other. So maybe you've heard, I mean, lots of people are using, instead of power over, power with. And so this acknowledgement that there's a shared power, and there's even more power, it's cumulative when we share and do power with together. And so I think that's essential. And again, mindfulness, the subtlety, being aware of the subtle, helps train us so we know when we've pushed or we pulled too much. And then we can respond, and we're humble so we can apologize and we can navigate. I think that that's just essential to sort of lifting all ships sort of thing.
Yes, and so what do you say to people? Because some people are considering transition. You know, they've tried. They've gotten to the point where they're saying, "I really need to make a change here," and it's just really difficult being there from day to day. But they know that you know, they're looking out the door. They know that there's the next chapter they're going to start. But right now, they're still entrenched in that place that they're about to leave. How do you help them, or what kind of guidance do you give them to be able to bridge that particular gap over into the new space?
You know, I think it's important to assess your whole situation. Everybody has a different financial situation, a different emotional situation, a different work situation, to really take stock of the whole picture. Even though you might want to run out of a burning building because it doesn't feel good, if the finances aren't there to bridge you for a time that you might not be making any money, it's not necessarily the most skillful thing unless it's truly an abusive situation. And so taking stock of all of that. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, you know, treat your job, if you really want to leave and you know you want to leave, treat your job just as a money machine for a while and build out a sidecar, a passion. You know, you can still do that work while you're going to work 8 hours a day. You can spend an hour or two at home each night, sort of building out sort of the next thing while you have the stability of a paycheck. And so again, everybody's in a different situation. So I usually say, just because you've seen the light, don't change everything immediately. That's the tendency of what people want to do. Like, oh, I've seen, I want to be a coach, I'm just going to quit my job and be a coach. That's a very common story. And yet, if the infrastructure, and you've never been self-employed, and you've never, you know, been an entrepreneur, and you've always had a corporate job, a lot of those people go back to corporate because, you know, they tore the Band-Aid off too fast. It wasn't a Band-Aid that should have been torn off that fast. Some Band-Aids, of course, you tear off fast. So I think that is a really important thing to consider. What is my situation? How many dependents do I have? Who am I responsible to other than myself? And then can I, if I don't like where I am, mindfulness can be really useful because it can be a training in bearing discomfort. It can create more resilience around the discomfort so we can bear it long enough that we can be skillful in our transition. I mean, how many people have been in a relationship and left the moment it got uncomfortable? The moment it gets uncomfortable is when the relationship starts. Up until then, there wasn't any true relating probably happening, and it was sort of just blissful fun. I'm talking about romantic relationships, but the moment you're mad because somebody used your toothbrush, then you're actually relating. Then it's actually begun. And I think that people don't really realize that their capacity to be in those uncomfortable moments, that's where your growth is. You don't want to stay and be in a damaging situation, of course. But if you notice that you have a pattern, and most people do, when it's uncomfortable, they want out. Well, there's a missed learning opportunity very often there. So that's sort of how we work with this. It's like, what is right? Let's take a full stock, a full picture, and then let's act skillfully in a way that's non-rushed towards something you want, but also non-rushed away from something that you don't. Both of those are disempowering because you're being reactive. And mindfulness lets us say, pause, take stock, let's make a skillful choice based on all the information.
Yeah, that's a perfect opportunity to learn how you can communicate together, to create that
Mm.
language that you can share. So let's turn this just a little bit. What about how can people engage their mindfulness in handling what a lot of people are experiencing? A lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. How do you help them?
So mindfulness roughly falls into two sorts of practices, two categories of practices. One is the broad category of concentration practices. Those are resourcing practices, stabilizing practices, comfort, security practices. The other category is insight practices, inquiry, exploring, a little bit destabilizing, a little bit rocking the boat on sort of known beliefs and conventions. And so when somebody's feeling wounded in some way, insight practice isn't necessarily a good option. It can be in certain situations, but generally speaking, we want to do concentration-based practices. And so those formal concentration practices, are the most known practices in mindfulness practice circles, which is like breath awareness, mantra, sort of returning to a sound that's sort of repeated to ground ourselves. I like a lot of body-based direction because I think that's really useful with trauma work. If somebody can feel safe in the body, not always the case in trauma work. But so I think that's really useful, concentration practices, but then also a lot of self-care, things that people might not call mindfulness practices. My mindfulness practice sometimes is taking a bath, is treating myself nicely, or getting the extra scoop of latte that I want. It's silly stuff, but sometimes treating yourself nicely is a really great mindfulness practice. And so sometimes stuff like that. Nothing really substitutes for regular practice, though. Try to do a little something each day. I think that's more effective than sort of every once in a while. So building in a little practice each day that sort of builds sort of this bank of stability and resource. I mean, I had a student years ago who said, oh, when she goes on vacation, she sort of parties and she comes back depleted. And so her vacations, actually, she needs a vacation when she gets back from her vacations. Whereas if it's a resourced vacation or a mindfulness practice, you're putting money in the bank. You're not spending from the bank of energy. And so I think that's a really nice distinction, is do things that really nurture you in the deepest way. Spend time with people that really nurture you. Do activities that really, you feel at ease at the end, not, oh, now I need a break because I just did that crazy thing. I just forced myself to work out harder than I should have, and now I'm going to be tired all day. Maybe once in a while do that, but, find this thing that really nurtures you and do it regularly.
And that would help a lot with feelings of overwhelm. I know a lot of people are feeling the overwhelm, what with, less people doing the same amount of work,
Mm,
and just having to juggle a lot more at home, right? Since many are
mm,
working from home.
mm-hmm,
And as we're getting older, we have elders that we're tending to also, whether they're right there with you or they're, far away. There's all of that responsibility that people are trying to juggle. Um,
mm-hmm.
I don't know, the mindfulness. When you try to explain to people what mindfulness is, right, what do you tell them? What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of some common definitions out there about being present, non-judgmentally, like John Kabat-Zinn's sort of, that's sort of the standard definition that most people go to. For me, there's a direct experience component, but I think the key piece for me is that there's a sustained attention. It's one, anybody can be super mindful for an instant, It's can we sustain that attention over time? Because that's where it really gets useful. When it's continuous or has a continuity, then we can see how things change in subtle ways, usually, but sometimes in obvious ways. And so I'll speak a little bit to client work, actually. When I'm working individually with somebody over time, I recognized over the years that when they're developing their own awareness, my awareness acts as a surrogate awareness until they recognize that it's not their awareness or my awareness, it's our awareness together. But until they know that, until they really take that in, they think that it's something that they got to get, that it's outside of themselves in some way. And that's the great fallacy. We're cultivating this quality that we already have, but that is either covered up or is latent, that hasn't been nurtured, just like a muscle that atrophies. If we don't exercise it, it stays strong. And so I also want to reference Winnicott's work around the transitional object. Of course, when a baby is growing, they have a transitional object. It's usually a blankie or a stuffed animal or something like that that helps them stay safe when mom or dad leaves. Well, we all need a transitional object, even when we're an adult. There's little charms that people wear, or a special necklace that reminds them of someone, or a locket or whatever. I think what mindfulness practice is we grow to a place where awareness is our transitional object. And when we're embedded in awareness, we always have our transitional object. We can't lose it because we're connected to it. It's not that we can't fall out of contact with it, but it's always available. It's ever present in that sense. Can I be a little bit more aware in this moment? Well, of course I can. Bring my attention to it a little bit more. It's there for me. And I think there's a real efficacy and resilience in that. And so that's sort of generally how I speak about mindfulness, is that it's this quality that, when the clouds are out and you don't see the sun isn't gone. It's just obscured. And the same with the awareness. It doesn't go away. And it's also not created necessarily in my experience. It's that I'm not connecting with it. I'm not in touch with it when it seems gone. You're aware when you're sleeping. I mean, you ever been asleep and somebody walks into the room and you lift your head up even though you were totally asleep? You're aware of people coming in and out of the room when you're asleep.
That's a good one. um, yes, I get it. I get it. Yeah, the thing is, we get so busy. We get so busy, and we get out of awareness. We get out of our mindfulness, and we just get so busy, right? We get so busy
Mm, mm-hmm,
doing and not being.
mm-hmm.
You know, what what's a quick thing that you suggest for people to do when they're like so much on the hamster wheel, and it's like, oh wait, hold on, what should they do
Yeah.
to get
They should direct their attention to what is always present. And what is always present in their experience is their body. So that can be soles of the feet on the floor, seat on the chair, back against the chair. Part of the reason breath is often an object of mindfulness practice is it's always present. It's always changing and it's always present. So it makes for a really nice thing to pay attention to. But anything in the present moment, and the body can't be in the future and it can't be in the past. It can only be in the present. So the moment we feel our body, all you got to do is get injured, get cut. You're cutting up an onion and you cut your finger. You are present instantly. And so we don't want it to take cutting your finger with a knife. We want to feel and refine our sensitivity so we can notice. I'm noticing myself sitting in this chair. But part of what happens to folks is when they're engaged, especially relationally, they almost eject out of their body. They're almost too involved in who they're talking to because we're so visual. Well, I'm not giving you 100% of my attention in this moment. I'm giving you about 35%. I have about 65% at home in my body. And it doesn't make me less effective in relating. It makes me more effective because I'm continuing to resource what's here while I'm engaging with the rest of it. And I think that most people have never been, like sometimes with clients, I'll say, okay, can you do 65-35? Can you do 50-50? Can you change it where your attention is? And does it diminish your ability to think and speak to me? You might find that it actually informs not to give 100% to the other. Because if I gave you 100%, well, at some point I'd be depleted and I'd have nothing else to offer because I gave you everything. And the same happens in intimate relationships. People think that they love each other. They're supposed to give 100% to their partner. Well, at some point, the partner looks over at nothing and says, you gave it all to me. I got it. So why would I don't need you anymore. You gave it all. And so,
And they wonder, well, where did you go?
yeah. I mean, and so, I mean, this is all really skillful about boundarying and codependency and that capacity to relate authentically and what it actually means. Like in intimate relationship, some people think 1 + 1 = 1. We merge. Well, I would say 1 + 1 doesn't even equal 2. 1 + 1 = 3. Two people and this new thing, the shared relationship. And I think that's just really important. And I think it's important not just in intimate relationships, but in all engagements. We're creating a dialogue here, but we're still two separate people, and that's healthy.
Yes. Yes. All right, so one more question around this. When we're at work and we have our coworkers, whether they are somebody that we are guiding, or that they're a peer, or they're someone above us, um, what's a mindful way to approach showing up in your authenticity in that relationship? You me centered me.
You know, mm-hmm,
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm. It's really challenging because when there's power dynamics or a task at hand is not aligned with what we really care about as a person in that moment. And so I think this is where a practice and really, this is where intention is really important. Goals are future leaning, they're future facing. Intention is about flavoring the present moment. So I can intend to be kind. And yet there might be moments when I'm unkind. That doesn't diminish the intention. It just means I need to keep practicing. My intention is still can be fully there to be kind, even when I'm being unkind. And I think this is really important because often we're so wrapped up on the goal. Oh, the goal is to have a better relationship with this person. Well, sometimes if they don't want that or they're not interested in doing their side of that equation, we can feel really stuck if we need it to feel like we're overly invested in it changing. And yet, if our intention is to be the best person that we can be, individually, but also in a work setting, that's about as good as we can do in certain situations. Is, maybe we've heard we can't sort of affect the outcome, but we can always choose to decide how to be, even in really challenging situations. You look at Man's Search for Meaning and Viktor Frankl's work when he was in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and it's a terrible situation, and yet he could still decide to share his one piece of bread. He could still decide. It didn't mean it was going to work out any better for him, but he could save that part of himself that he did not want to be imprisoned. Or you look at Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela and all these great figures. If we get too angry or we get too invested in the outcome, we actually imprison ourselves. And so the capacity to, and this is a mindful practice, mindfulness practice has an element of sort of ethical and moral sort of like dignity. And so that's all a part of it. We want to show up. And if you really can't show up as your best self in a certain situation, you're in the wrong place. Then at some point that decision needs to be made that, oh, I can't do it here. I might, and it's not some shortcoming of mine. This just isn't conducive and nurturing to my deeper sense of self. And there is a time to make that decision, but nobody can decide that for another.
And I think that's really where we are. It's how are people putting action behind that decision of of choice. Really, the choice that they're making for how they want their future to be, how they want to
Yeah,
shift
people make
lived experience. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, people make decisions to leave industries that aren't particularly nurturing of humanity all the time, and that's happened. But I think now people are really recognizing through COVID that if you're not really a part of the solution, you are a part of the problem.
Hmm.
And that's been a saying and sort of lip service for a long time. Now people are feeling that in their bodies, and they don't want to feel like that, nor should they.
And they're seeing how that awareness now is starting to ripple out into their relationships. And it's like the lens is on now, the glasses are on now. They're looking for what's in alignment, what's not in alignment, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. You know? And so everything is shifting. And it's a little uncomfortable when we're in the process, but it's good. It's good. It's good. And everything's going to settle down again in a new way. And, when we are more conscious and attentive to our piece of what that's going to look like, that's how we change the world. That's how we change what the future can be. Hmm.
I think it's a really exciting time. I know it's an uncomfortable time for a lot of people, and it's also a really exciting time because, some seeds require a forest fire to crack open and to germinate. And, that was my experience. When I first started practicing mindfulness, I would sometimes describe it as it felt like the skin was being torn off my body because I was shedding some really old, terrible feelings and stuff. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but I also wouldn't not wish it because it was so important for me to go through that and become who I needed to be.
And there is always the other side. We do get to the other side. That's a wonderful thing. We get to the other side where the light is, where there's more ease, where we feel so much better and lighter. Oh my gosh,
Mm.
do you remember what it felt like to just let all those layers fall away? Just fall away.
I remember. I mean, it's funny you say that. I haven't thought about this in 30 years, but I remember not wanting to get out of bed in the morning,
Hmm.
and just like, oh, I don't know what the day's going to bring, but it's not going to be good. I
Hmm.
remember feeling like that. And now I can't wait to get up. I get up super early because I'm excited. It's every day is Christmas. That doesn't mean every day is fun.
Yeah.
But every day is like, what's it going to be? Let's find out.
Exactly, exactly. I always tell my clients, expect miracles every single day. Expect miracles and then let it surprise you. Life is such a surprise. It's wonderful.
Have you heard the Einstein quote around you can live your life as if nothing is a miracle, or you can live your life as if everything is a miracle, and you get to decide.
Exactly. That really, I think that's the big turning point for people when it comes to their spiritual journey and consciousness. It's when you really understand that you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Choice. And you've had a choice all along, and you have made choices all along. So, yeah, there we are.
Yeah,
This
no, wonderful. And mindfulness helps us make those choices deliberate, conscious, and truly chosen rather than chosen on some past conditioning or somebody else's values. Because, it's a hard thing to say, but in the United States, at least, if so many people are trying to covet your attention and to plant fears, and if you don't choose deliberately and inform yourself, then unconscious to all of us, those are being planted all the time. And I think this capacity, and it doesn't mean that some of them aren't valid, but what it does mean is we get to check in and decide which ones are important for me to factor in to my worldview and which ones are just noise.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fun part of it. You're sifting and sorting. Oh, do I want to keep this one moving forward? No, let's leave this one behind. I'm going to stick with this one because this one feels like it's really more in alignment with who I am and what I want to do from this moment on. And it can be that simple as just today, now, in this moment, I make a new choice. There you go. And you're in a
Wonderful.
different trajectory.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, this has been so much fun. I'm so glad you're going to be joining us for the summit. So, do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share before I ask you my final question?
No, it's just been a pleasure being here and chatting. And as fun as our phone call was, this has been wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, I've enjoyed it too. Yes. Okay, so my final question, Jonathan. If you could speak to all the leaders in the world, all of them, and you knew that they would listen to what you have to say, that they would take it to heart and perhaps even act on it, what would you share with them?
Hmm. It's okay to love yourself fully.
Let's just let that sink in. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I say that because it's a freedom, liberation, peace, and kindness is a psychological project. And it is for those as much that are doing damage as those that are damaged or feel like they've had damage done to them. And if we really want to heal the world, everyone needs to be included in that compassion and that empathy. And that doesn't mean we're going to put ourselves in harm's way. Forgiveness is robust. It's protective when it needs to be, but it's essential.
And we shall close with that. Thank you
Hmm.
so much for that beautiful, beautiful feeling, sense.
Hmm.
Wisdom. Yes, we need the reminders. All of our leaders need the reminders because we've forgotten. You know, we've forgotten a lot, and it's a time of being brought back into remembrance of what is really
Hmm.
true.
You know, the word mindfulness in the ancient language from which it comes means things remembered.
Mm.
That's the root of mindfulness. So it's about remembering who we really are, remembering the present moment, and connecting to that.
Mm. Good to know. Yay!
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the Leader's Edge. We'll have you back if we can get into your busy, busy schedule. We'll have you back, and we'll
That would be
definitely
wonderful.
see you at the summit. Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
You know what? How do people get in touch with you? I forgot to ask.
Probably the easiest way is via Mindful Life, Mindful Works website, which is www.mindfullifemindfulwork.com. We're also all over social media. Feel free to connect with us on any of those platforms and stay in touch. I mean, LinkedIn is sort of our main hub of operations, social media wise, but again, we're always interested in a good conversation.
Mhm. All right. We'll have more. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for The Leader's Edge. My name is Baylan Megino, the founder of Global Dreammakers and creator of the Dreammaker Matrix. We will see you next time. Thank you.